So are South Africans excessive gamblers? Did they spend over 1 trillion in gambling? Well, Samkele Masego is here to explain and verify.
Well, Mfundo, gambling is the fastest growing sector in South Africa. Let's look at what the numbers have to say. Let's look at our first graphic, which explains this particular phenomenon of gambling. Mfundo, you look at the financial year amount wagered in gambling in South Africa. This is the amounts of gambling. In the financial year 2022-2023, it was 815 million rands, Mfundo. Then there was an exponential growth, a jump of 40.2% that goes to the financial year 2023-2024, 1.1 trillion rands. That is the weighted amount of gambling within the country within the financial year of 2023-2024, Mfundo. These amounts are part of the NGB annual reports within the country that basically looks at gambling within the country. Financial year 2022-2023, 815 million. Exponential jump, exponential growth of 40.2% increase to 1.1 trillion rands within 2023-2024 financial year.
That's a massive figure, Samkele. That's like 50% of National Treasury's allocated budget for 2024-25 year. Just explain this to us.
Firstly, it is important to note that the value of the weighted amount is significantly higher because winnings are often recycled to place further bets. Therefore, the value of the gambling industry is far smaller than the weighted amount. In layman's terms, if Samkele Masego wins 850 million rands, he takes a huge portion of that at 850 rands and bets it back into the system, basically repeated gambling. Let's look at this particular second graphic, which explains the weighted amount, particularly of 1.1 trillion rands, inclusive of amounts won and recycled into betting again. For instance, in sports betting, if you are betting against soccer teams, for instance, let's take the English Premier League or the Spanish La Liga or the South African Premier League. You win, you take the money back. The next games of the following weekend, you use the money that you won this weekend to bet the following weekend. You are basically recycling the money back into the gambling industry as opposed to taking it out and using it elsewhere. Recycling increases the weighted amount. This basically means the money that I've won this weekend, I put it back into the system instead of cashing it out. The figure reveals a high rate of recycling back into the system, which speaks about addictive gambling, particularly within South Africans.
Now, data shows us that the Western Cape is at 31.7% and Gauteng 22%, basically attributing or owning the lion's share of the gambling industry. If we had to look at a national picture, what is the gambling industry worth nationally?
Let's look at the gross gambling revenue, which is the revenue that the gambling companies generate after paying payouts. This is essentially the money that I would get after cashing out on the monies that I had won. This is the gross gambling revenue, basically the GGR. 2022-2023 financial year, 47.1 billion rands. That is the gross gambling revenue that is generated by the industry. Then there was an increase of 25.7%, small minimal growth as opposed to the larger growth that has recycling within the industry. That jumps to the 2023-2024 financial year to 59.3 billion rands, Mfundo. So this is an increase of basically 25.7% of the monies within the industry that the gambling companies themselves make within this industry at a national level.
And then do we know how much is actually paid to players in this industry?
If we look at how much is paid to players within this particular industry, Mfundo, according to the National Gambling Board, in some cases, up to 95% of the weighted amount is returned to players as winnings. For instance, if you look at the average return to player per gambling mode for 2023-2024, you look at casinos, 94.2% is given back to players. You go to betting, 95.2%. This is particularly where you find a lot of people who are sports fanatic. They bet there, they tend to win. Some of them tend to cash out. Some of them tend to recycle the money, but they end up with 95.2% of the funds paid to the gamblers. Then you look at bingo, 93.7%. You look at LPM, that is 88.1%, Mfundo.
And then beyond this, if we had to look at just the gambling industry growing by the 25.7% between the 2022-23 year and 2023-24, do we know which gambling mode drives this growth actually?
Betting sector generated more than two-thirds of the industry turnover at 66.6%, Mfundo, with sports betting dominating. Sports betting is dominating the sector at this point in time. In South Africa, it has skyrocketed over the past several years, reaching 700 billion in 2024, Mfundo. So, for instance, if you look at sports betting, 2016-2017 financial year, that was sitting at 33 billion. You go to the 2027-2018 financial year, 39 billion. As a small exponential growth once again in 2028-2029 financial year to 52 billion. Then 2029-2020, 62 billion. 2020-2021, 107 billion rands. Then 2021-2022, another exponential growth. Double that of 107 billion rands, going to 233 billion rands 2021-2022 financial year. Then another double figure digit growth, 2022-2023 financial year, 418 billion rands. Then 2023-2024, another exponential growth by over 282 billion rands, going to 700 billion rands in 2023-2024. So that was an exponential growth from 418 billion rands to 700 billion rands. That is essentially the value of gambling, of sports betting within the country, 2023-2024 financial year.
That growth is quite significant. But is it really good for South Africa's economy? And more importantly, does it not impact South Africa's social fabric and even just the individual's own financial management?
Well, Mfundo, let's bring in some of the cases, particularly when you look at legalized gambling. These are some of the slides we'll look at towards the end. We're going to bring in an expert. I'm not sure if they are on the line, which is Thembisa Luthuli, a certified financial coach and author, to further clarify these particular issues. A very good afternoon to you, Thembisa Luthuli. Can you hear us?
Yes, Samgelo, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Gambling, a huge industry within the country. Tax revenue from gambling activities has increased by a total of amount of 4.8 billion rands. Taxes and levies was collected during the 2023-2024 financial year. However, is gambling sufficiently regulated and monitored within the country?
So let's remember in South Africa, the gambling is regulated by the National Gambling Act, which establishes all the frameworks for national gambling boards and provincial authorities. So while all these frameworks are robust, but there's still challenges that we face, especially the enforcement of things like responsible gambling, the advertisement restriction. You will see that in recent times, you will find every TV advert has some sort of advertising, making gambling as such an appealing thing. But it is there, the regulation is there, but there are still such challenges for things like illegal gambling, unlicensed gambling that happens in uncontrolled markets. But we can do better as a country through greater collaboration between regulators, operators and financial institutions.
The National Gambling Board claims that most money spent on gambling is returned to players as winnings. Can gambling be a source of income for some players? If so, is this sustainable?
To be quite honest, if it was to be a source of income, the houses would have been closed because they would have been making a loss. So while some players may occasionally win large sums, but gambling is never and will never be a reliable, sustainable source of income. The odds are always designed to favor the house, because at the end of the day, they are the business, they need to make profits. So it means that some of the players will win big, but the majority of the players will lose more than they win over time, if we look at overtime, right? So we cannot say that gambling can be taken as a sustainable source of income. But we do acknowledge that there are people who are professional gamblers, and they earn a living through gambling. They've spent their time looking at the odds, researching, but in a larger scale, we cannot take gambling as a source of income.
When you look at the money that is essentially recycled back into the system by those whom have won in these gambling proceedings, how do you regulate such instances where people have won large sums of money, then go on to recycle them back into the system and lose those amounts of money from a financial management perspective?
So let's remember, gambling can be one of the addictions that can get out of control. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to financial literacy, financial education, mindset changing, and teaching people about budgeting, and also self-control, self-management. When you have won, know when to have limits, budget how much you would gamble, and when you have won certain amount, what will you do with that amount? So it's very important that gamblers be aware of things like budgeting. They set time limits, because some will gamble every day and end up losing more than what they already have. They also have limits, because limits such as not borrowing for the sake of gambling. So it all goes back into saying it's very important to strengthen in our country the financial literacy, the financial education, to help people understand the implications as well as the consequences of this gambling activity.
Last question, from a personal finance management perspective, how would you advise the players to act, particularly in this scenario where you find lots of people recycling the money they've won back into the system? What's your advice to them?
My recommendation is be able to have self-awareness, and that means know your money, be able to see when you are losing and seek help. There's always professional help into either blocking yourself from all these sides, seek professional help from psychological perspective, professional financial planners who will help you see that in reality you're actually losing money than you're making money. That's the first step, acknowledging that there might be a problem and seeking help and try and manage yourself.
Thank you very much, Thembisa Luthuli. Well, Mfundo, that was Thembisa Luthuli basically explaining the scourge of gambling within the country. Multi-billion rand industry has grown exponentially over the past few years. You saw the numbers yourself. Many South Africans are addicted, particularly when you look at sports betting. You know, South Africans are sports fanatic, and you being a sports fanatic, they would also want to make a quick buck out of it. Not just those who are sports bosses getting those dividends and those commissions from the deals they bring on board for the sponsorships of the leagues, sponsorships of the teams, whether it be Bafana Bafana, whether it be the Springboks, whether it be Kaizer Chiefs, my favorite team, or Orlando Pirates. Those
You're already promoting them here. Don't abuse the platform. But you know, it's quite interesting when looking at those numbers that 1 trillion is actually then recycled back into the system as opposed to taking it out. And you were asking that question to the guest to say, is it not concerning that they don't maybe try to withhold some of those winnings and put a smaller portion back into the gambling? They take almost 95% back into the same system.
Well, it speaks to how South Africans particularly would want to say, well, I've won 800,000 rands. Maybe if I put 95% of that 800,000 rands back into the system, I'll come back with 2.3 million rands. And that will just be addictive. You'll take that 2.3 million rands back into the system instead of taking those resources or those funds and going to start your life. For instance, if we look at the legalized modes of gambling within the country, our last particular slides, it is casinos, it is betting on horse racing, sport, and other limited payout machines, LPMs, then it's bingo, traditional and electronic. Many South Africans particularly go that electronic route of sports betting, Mfundo.
No, that's quite interesting. Samkele, thank you very much for that. That's Samkele Maseko with this week's installment of Explain and Verify.